I'm Sean Callahan. I'm the founder of Anecdote. We started about 13 years ago. We run our programs in 24 countries, in 7 different languages, and get to help businesses and organisations that range from not-for-profits that are looking at drug and alcohol rehabilitation. We've just done a project for an organisation up in Queensland around that, all the way up to large corporations that are working globally across the earth. So it's a wide range. When you're just pitching something or trying to influence or persuade, as soon as it sounds like you are doing something special, right, where all of a sudden you're performing your story, your influence actually goes down, right? You need to keep the language conversational, just sort of a banter back and forwards, and you never want to fall into what I call the storytelling voice. And I've seen this. People will start chatting to someone, doing their pitch, and when they get to the story, their voice changes, and the next thing you know, they're going, "Man, 3 years ago, there was a change. So we looked this way, and we looked that way." And I'm going, what's going on here? So we must always be mindful of the fact that we want our stories to be invisible. We don't want anyone to even notice that a story's been told, which leads me to the other key principle in our work, and that is it's the rookie 101 mistake that I see, and that is, and let me just give you a scenario, 2 scenarios actually, and see what you think here. So imagine, you're standing in front of a group of people, you're pitching your idea, and you start off by saying, "Okay, guys, I just want to start with a story. What do you think the audience is thinking right at that moment?" My experience is that people start to roll their eyes, and they go, "Oh my God, do we have time for this?" Especially very, I don't know, structured, financially focused, business-oriented folk. They don't like the word story, right? Let's try another scenario. Rewind that and play it again. Instead of that, you say something like, "Guys, just a couple of weeks ago, something amazing happened in our organisation." Now what are you thinking? Well, you're sitting there going, "What happened? Tell me what happened." Now you're still going to tell a story, but you never use the S word, right? We need to vanquish the word story from our language when we're actually giving these pictures. So that's the 101. 2 little things to think about in terms of principles in how you use the story techniques. Really, there's really 4 steps that I think about in that process of mastering the storytelling and making sure that these stories are flowing through. And the first one is as you would imagine, is discovery. You need to discover new stories to tell. I'll come back to that in a moment. Then you have to have one way to, or a number of ways to remember those stories, and really get a sense so that you can tell them off the top of your head without notes, without a PowerPoint deck or anything like that. So when you're chatting with someone, you can sort of say, "Oh yeah, actually just 2 weeks ago," and then you can tell a story. Then thirdly, it's around how do you go about sharing the story so it has a maximum impact. Right? What is it about a story well told? And we'll touch on a few of those things. And then finally, there comes a point where you need to refresh your stories. There's lots of reasons for refreshing them. Sometimes you get sick of telling them yourself. Other times they've been worn out. Context has changed. A whole range of reasons. But you've got to be continually looking to think, okay, when do we need to refresh these stories? So the first one is discovery. And to me, this is around really feeling what's going on around you. I find that whenever you have a sensation where the hairs sort of raise, off your arms or up your back or neck or anything like that, you should be looking around going, "What just happened there?" Right? Because something happened where a good story was either told or something happened which would make a great story. There's lots of different places to find these stories. Of course, the people that you're helping are one of the best sources for these stories. And And really, a lot of that is, and we're chatting about it today, that you've just got to be in a situation to help people feel comfortable, telling those stories. I actually run a little technique called anecdote circles. Very effective for getting lots and lots of stories. You might get 6 or 8 people around the table, and there's this really interesting dynamic that occurs when you get a group of people together. And the job of the facilitator is not to say too much. All you have to do is ask a few basic questions around asking for examples and actually just being comfortable being silent. And this is what happens. I mean, I remember my first anecdote circle was with a group of riverine ecologists, right? So the big bearded guys. And they were sitting around the table and we were trying to work out how they got funding for this research they were doing. And so I asked my first question about funding, and I had in my mind they just had to be quiet. And so I stayed quiet. It seemed like forever. And eventually, one of the guys just went, okay, I'll go first. And he starts telling a story about how they, sort of got this funding by taking all these different risks and, sort of designing in such a way that really appealed to the fund provider. And as soon as he started telling his story, you could see the rest of the people kind of relax into it. And next thing you know, the next person told a story. And the next person, and the next person. And all of a sudden, you just had I had to almost stop these people telling the stories. So there's very much a dynamic that occurs when you get a group of people. It's like at a dinner party, right? You walk into the dinner party, you don't have, I'm going to tell this story, this story, this story. It's context, it's triggers. You get reminded of something, you recount your own experience. And what you're saying is, hey, I've had that similar experience as well. So one of the things that's great to do is run these anecdote circles to collect stories. The second thing is, and probably the last thing I'll say about this is, you have to put some effort to go and find them. They don't just always rock up on your doorstep. You usually have to get out to where the stories are happening. They don't happen while you sitting in your office just hoping you'll find some stories that'll come past your way. That rarely happens. You've got to go out where people tell stories. And they tell stories where they're eating, where they're catching up, where they're socialising. These are all the places where stories are told. That's where you need to go to. So around the remembering and recalling these stories, right? Probably the first thing I'd say here is that I'm very interested in oral stories. So, I want people to be able to stand in front of people and just recount the experience. And I find something very peculiar happens when you start to write your stories down. It's because our oral language is quite different to our literate language. We use different types of words, we do different things. In oral language, you can get away with lots of things. You can repeat things, you can stumble over your words, you can put ums and ahs in there, you can not even finish and just go on to the next point, and and people can't understand what you're talking about, right? And whereas when you're writing something, everything has to be perfect. The grammar Nazis will come out and they want it to be exactly right. And that's why when you read a transcript, it always feels a bit, not quite right, because that's how we speak. It's weird. But for this to work, I think you have to keep your oral stories oral. And the way you do that is obviously keeping them oral by just going the traditional way, telling them from one person to another. But if you want to scale it up, and we all want to do that, using podcasts and using video is another great way of keeping oral stories oral. But one of the things that's really useful to do, especially if you're trying to influence, persuade people to participate in your program, and to become a stakeholder in some ways, you need stories that you can tell off the cuff. You need to be able to go, bam, there's a story for you to tell. And there's a simple way I have to remember stories. And the way you do it is when you come across a story that you think, yeah, that's a great story. I really like that story. I find it works well if you then find a trusted partner that you can just tell that story to, and then you have a conversation about what the story means. Christine Nixon had a great story to tell. She said to me, just after the fires, OPSM put in caravans around all the fire-affected areas. And in this little town of Nabathong, they put a caravan, and there was this elderly couple that come up, and the woman is complaining of grit in her eyes. So anyway, they sort of clean out her eyes, and everything's fine there. And then they turn to the husband and sort of say, is there anything we can do for you? And he said, no, well, I'm fine. I'm legally blind anyway because of diabetes. And they went, oh, okay. When was the last time you had your checkup? And he thinks about it and goes, oh, about 7 years ago. And oh no, you got to get checked up much faster than that. Much more regularly than that. And so they organised for him to go to an ophthalmologist, gets checked up. Turns out he's got a condition that there's now a treatment for. So he gets in for surgery a few months after that, and has the surgery, and he gets a good proportion of his eyesight back. Now, as soon as I heard that story, I rang up my business partner and I said, Mark, I've got this one I want to share with you. And I shared the story, and I said, so what does that story mean to you? So what's the point of that story? And he thought about it for a while, and he said, small things can make a big difference. And then he said, you know what, the other one is, even in the shittiest situations, good things can happen. Anyway, and I started throwing in a few ideas about how important it was for these big businesses to get involved in these recoveries. And what we're doing is I'm making meaning out of that story, right? And we're kind of like tagging the story. And this is what happens. It's beautiful, right? That you'll forget about that story. You might tell it a few times at that point, and then you forget about that story. Months will go past. You'll be in a meeting, and someone will say, yeah, but can small things really make a difference? And you'll go, you know what, I was doing this work with the Victorian Bushfire Reconstruction Authority, blah, blah, blah. And it just pops into your head. It's just beautiful. Now, the thing is, though, you don't remember everything in the stories. You do after telling them a few times, but in the first instance, you'll be a bit vague about it. So you usually have to put a few dot points in some sort of system. And I use Evernote, and I just keep all my stories tracked in Evernote. And I don't write them out in full. I just put a few dot points and things that I need to remember. So it's really important to know that every story, for it to be effective, has to have a clear point, right? And the story then is all about illustrating that point, so you get into some outcome. Now that outcome might be to inspire action, it might be to change mindsets, it might be to build rapport and make connection. But to get people to listen to your story, they don't they just want to listen to a story. They want to learn something. They want to have this point illustrated. So you have to have strong points of view, and you start your story at the point, and then you follow it with the actual story. Probably the most important thing here is that a story doesn't really become a story until it has a business point, right? And I think it's really important to actually preface your stories with your business point. And the reason you do that is that it makes your audience relax. So if you're standing in front of the audience and you just launch into a story, they go, why am I listening to this story? They're getting a bit on edge. But if you sort of say something like, the most important thing for turning someone around in drug rehabilitation is helping them work it out for themselves. 3 weeks ago, we were down when you start telling the story about what happened. And so they're hanging on to that point. They're going, okay, this is about a key lesson I've just been told about, but this is the evidence for it. It's like a little story, which is a tiny bit of anecdotal evidence. When you do this has an enormous impact on how you share the story, because all of a sudden you realise that what needs to be included in the story, what can be jettisoned. And so you keep nice and focused in telling the story. Right? So relevant statement, essentially the point of the story, followed by the story. Now, ending the story. Now, this is one I see people go off on all sorts of different tracks which are not helpful. And one is there's a strong urgency, I suppose, where people want to get to the end and then they want to tell you about what the story was about. And what you're doing there is you're kind of taking the power of the story back to the teller. But in fact, at the end of the story, you want the story to be owned by the listener. So here's a couple of strategies for finishing. When you finish your story, one strategy is to shut up and just finish right there and then. Let them, turn it over in their head. And there'll be a pause and there'll be a look in their face of, they haven't quite got it, but that's fine, right? They're just making sense of it. They're just turning it over in their mind. The second strategy is to ask them a question, right? Sort of say, finish your story and then say, so has that ever happened to you? And this is really a great opportunity to start a conversation, right? Because now they're going, you know what, I had something similar happen. And then they will share an experience with you and then back and forwards. Perfect way to kick off a conversation. The third element is where you give your reflection on what that story brought up for you. So this is not so much a straight push strategy of, I'm going to tell you what to think about the story, but you might finish the story and sort of say, so, I guess one experience really got me thinking about was, and then you start to reflect on the story. So it's a much softer way to reinforce your point without giving that impression that you're telling the listener what they need to think about the story. So the last step of the process is refresh. And here, you've just really been very mindful about how many times you've told the story to a particular audience. It turns out we have a very low threshold on what we will accept hearing the same story. In fact, once you've heard it once or twice, that's usually enough for a particular audience. But you can take that same story and tell it in all sorts of different, at different audiences over and over again, and that's fantastic. In fact, you'll be learning about all sorts of other techniques, the video techniques, the photographic techniques, all those sort of things through the different modules of this program on how you can do that, right, and where you can scale this up. But once you feel that you've done that, you've got to find new stories. And that's why the discovery process just becomes vital. You're always looking for new ways of sharing the same idea, but through different stories. The second thing is, and this is really important, is you can actually get sick of your own stories. Right? That is, you told it so many times yourself, you've got tired of it. And the audience kind of picks up on this. So just to keep yourself excited, it's good to tell new stories. In fact, this is what comedians do. Louis C.K. has a policy of when he finishes a season, he throws away all his jokes and starts with totally new jokes because he said it just keeps him fresh and it keeps him energized. And essentially that's what we're trying to do here. And I guess the third thing I would say is that sometimes the context change. Things happen in the world that have changed. And so a story that used to work well for you may not work well for you again at a particular time and point. So you've got to be mindful of that. You've got to be always thinking about, okay, how is this story being received? How are people interpreting this story at this particular moment in time? So you've got to be careful about that as well. So now that you've got, the discover process, the process around remembering the stories, and then, a few ideas around sharing, and now also about refreshing this, you can just continue around that cycle, and that becomes your strategy for getting stories flowing through your organisation and out to your audiences to really make an impact and help them understand what you're about and get them excited about the things that you're doing. So good luck. I hope to hear lots and lots of great stories about it.